Well, Terry, thanks so much for hanging with me today.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. Well, I have been really interested in some work that you've done recently talking about bringing the passion back in relationships. And so one of the things that I was curious about is why do we want to have sex so much in the beginning of a relationship versus maybe as the relationship, kind of goes on over the years?
Well, that is a very interesting question, and there's lots of different ways to answer it. So we have like the biological drive, right? So that's one part of it is that we are connecting with someone who unconsciously, subconsciously, primally, we're like, could help me create more of this species, right? This is what we want to do. We want to basically procreate. I mean, this is part of um, a primal drive, but it's more than that because if you look at the science, what's happening to our bodies when we feel attracted to someone, when we're falling in love, the same chemicals and hormones that get us addicted to things are being released during this phase. So we could actually we're physically dopamine, oxytocin, all these things that feel so good. And so we want more of that. If you look at it from a psychological point of view, someone like Harville Hendrix, I don't know if you're familiar with his work.
Sure.
Oh my God, I had him on my show. I was like dying. His work is just so brilliant. And he and
He's a
his wife,
legend.
Helen, oh, without a doubt. And they were actually both surprised at how much I was fangirling. They were like, who is this chick? And I was like, oh my God. But anyway, his whole theory, which I definitely have seen in 22 years of being a psychotherapist to be true, is that we basically our childhood wounds, we attract someone who will in some way mirror them. So from his point of view, it's giving us the possibility, the potential to work it out. The way that I see it and the work that I've done is more like it's that end. When you are attracted to someone who you've had a similar experience, even if it's something that isn't good. So let's say you had a very authoritarian father and you didn't like that experience, you may find yourself drawn to, if you're heterosexual, female, you may find yourself drawn to men who are authoritarian because in your unconscious mind, there's a recognition like, oh, that person is appropriate partner material, even if you didn't like it. So I think that there's a whole bunch of things going on, but we're also in that bonding phase. What do we call it? We call it the honeymoon phase of a relationship because our attraction to that person and being with them, I mean, your body changes, literally your pupils dilate, like there are all of these things that happen, becomes more important than anything else, right? We just want to be with that person in the same way when a substance that you might be addicted to gets removed, when that person, right, if they go travel or you have to travel and you're away from them, that same sense of withdrawal you have in the beginning. And then when you're together with someone over time, real life sets in, right? We still have to pick up groceries and make food. We still need to pay the taxes. We still should go vote. All these things that when you're madly in love, you're just like, hey, let's have sex in a limo and in the bathroom and anywhere and outside. And it's a way of bonding because you haven't yet created a life with that person. And part of the having so much sex is that we're wanting to do that.
That's good. That's good. And so the challenges then to the frequency, you alluded to that, is this kind of real life. How does the kind of real life get in the way of that, or how does it decline over time?
Well, there's lots of very obvious ways, right? So we have like life cycle events. So having children. A lot of times, if you have a difficult pregnancy, you're not having sex towards the end of it. Sometimes you are, but a lot of times you're not. And then you're not supposed to have sex for 6 weeks afterwards. And now you have a new human, and suddenly sleep.
And no sleep.
Yeah, sleep becomes way more sexy than sex when you're in that situation. Also, if someone is not well, so illness can get in the way. Um, Menopause is that shit is real. I hate to say it. I mean, I had my own experiences that I've written, and I swear I'm gonna actually write a book called Menno Marathon, because there is literally no pause. I feel like that shit has gone on for like 10 years. But there are physical things that happen when you're menopause, right? So now you have less estrogen. And, there are things that I'd read about that would happen during menopause. Oh, you might have hot flashes, which actually, personally, I did not really have. But what people don't tell you is that sex can become incredibly painful, even after having 2 decades of a very healthy, robust, fun, interesting sex life. Suddenly, if sex becomes painful, now there's this whole conflict that you're in. You still want to have sex with the person, but you don't want to be in pain. So yes, there are certainly things that you can do, and there's hormone replacement, but those are just kind of an array of life cycle things. And then what I find in my practice is that unresolved resentments, couples who don't have great communication when things are rough, like there are different like archetypes of couples, and there are some that are very avoidant. They never learned how to have a hard conversation. Anytime they have to have a hard conversation, it seems so overwhelming that they're almost like the most polite couple you've ever met. But that keeps things on the surface, right? Because if we're really in a relationship, there are going to be things that need to be talked about. You have to make a simple request that something changes. Like there are things that, someone could just also get on your nerves. This is spending lots of time together. These are normal sort of ups and downs. But I think that back to sort of the psychological aspect of people not having a lot of sex in long-term relationships, I really find that unresolved, unspoken, unfigured out resentment is one that it really can kill the libido. So that's one thing to really look at. And also life cycle. In that, not life cycle, in looking at your parents. So you have some people who were raised by parents that once the mom became a mom, that was like her primary function in life. And you never really viewed her as a woman again, sort of. And she didn't view herself. These downloaded blueprints, as I call them, we have them in all areas of life. And sexuality is one of those areas. And so with my clients, I do what's called the downloaded sex and sensuality blueprint, where you're really looking at, like, do I feel like it's appropriate to be a 55-year-old woman and to be sexual, to be sensual, what does that look like? If you came from a very sort of a straight-laced family or a very religious family, the answer might be no. That like that ship has sailed. It's about other things, right? So there's many things that can get into the mix of why we stop having regular sex.
I know one of the questions that I hear being brought up, whether it's on podcasts or even you see it in magazines, is how often is enough? It's like, I don't know if the word enough, but how often are other people doing it? I guess would be the question. Do you hear that from your clients?
Oh, I do. And there's actually science. It's not, we don't even have to guess. So we kind of know what is going on, which is that in healthy relationships, having sex approximately once a week is really good for the relationship. And then they compared it to people who had sex less than once a month. And this was a weird way to put it, but this was how they put it, that the difference in happiness, satisfaction, fulfillment in those people who the couples who were having sex once a week, they likened it to money, saying that someone who makes $25,000 a year and someone who makes $75,000 a year, let's say, that it was more important, the increase in that person's happiness was the sex once a week would create more satisfaction than making $75,000 for making $25,000.
Wow.
So I thought it was like this weird comparison, but I got it.
Yeah.
I got it. And when we look at, so anyway, so that answered the question, right? So we're saying approximately once a week would be great. I actually knew someone once who has been married for, I guess they're married now, probably 50 years. And the conversation at the time was weird because he was kind of like an uncle by marriage weirdness. But anyway, what he said made so much sense. He said that he and his wife that they institutionalized sex by having sex every week when they came home from church. Even when their kids were small, they would be like, this is mommy and daddy's private time, basically. And he said, Terri, our friends then all sort of made fun of us and thought like, how not romantic are you that you're doing that? And he said, well, guess what? 50 years later, guess who are the only people still having sex? And we're in our 70s, almost 80. And that is us. And we still have sex once a week. So when the thing that has to shift psychologically is that when we're in the beginning of a relationship, we are drawn, right? We are compelled physically to be sexual, to become one with that other person. As you create an actual life, you might create human beings, you might, have children together, whatever it is that you're doing. There has to be a conscious, right? So an intentional decision jointly that this will be an important part of keeping the relationship good. So I say to clients, hey, sometimes you have sex even when you don't want to. And I don't mean under duress, and I don't mean someone else forcing you. I say the same way that when you're in a long-term relationship, every decision that I make, I've been married for 20 years together, 22 years with my husband. Every decision I'm about to make, I think, how will this impact Vic? How will this impact us? I'll talk to him. I don't make any major decisions. And it's not like he's the boss of me, because he's definitely not. And I'm not the boss of him. But my priority is the health of my marriage above pretty much everything else. And I think that, I don't know that every person has to feel the way that I do, but I do know that we must intentionally prioritize what's important and keeping your physical life vibrant, because it's not just sex. When we're talking about having sex once a week, there was another study done about, is it that more affection creates more sex, or that more sex creates more affection? And they couldn't really come to terms with what came first, the chicken or the egg. But what they did determine was that more of one creates more of the other. And so when I'm talking about being sexual, I'm not only talking about sex, like actually penetration sex, right? It's about intimate time together. It is about affection. It's about flirting, right? It's about remembering that your person is still a person. And if you see them and they look good to you standing in the kitchen making that salad, you can say, nice butt. Like those things that you would say in the beginning, or that you couldn't even stop yourself from saying. It's very easy to become so habituated in a relationship, and habituated sexually, where it's like, you do this, I do that, then we're done, which that's definitely better than not doing it. But there are certainly plenty of ways to make it more interesting than that.
How would you suggest that a couple have this conversation? It seems like a bit of an awkward conversation to have. How would you suggest that one of the individuals bring it up about, like, hey, we're not having as much sex anymore, or hey, I wish we had more sex, or, you know what I mean? Like, how would you suggest that happen?
I definitely wouldn't do it like that. Because here's the thing. We always want to have the conversation, when so much of the time, from a therapeutic point of view, what needs to happen is a different action. So what I would say to my clients is just get empowered. So instead of, you don't need your partner's permission to be more sexual. You don't need to make it a complaint unless you're also going to suggest some really juicy solution or idea. So my thought is, if it's been a long time, I've had clients who haven't had sex with their partners in 4 years, and then you can come back from that. You can come back from anything. So part of it is start to normalize affection again. Don't put the pressure on the relationship. Make it be like, well, we need to have sex every Wednesday. Maybe that Sunday thing worked for that person, but you're talking about a specific situation that either sensuality, sexuality, resentment is built, whatever it is. But if you're in the relationship, instead of wanting to blame your partner and be like, well, if they would only, whatever you think, that if they would only do that, everything would be okay. Every time you think that, I'm going to ask you to look inside and say, What action could I take right now that might be helpful? Could I send a flirty text? Could I put a little sexy note in, and with a little lip print on it, maybe in the briefcase or in the pocket of what you know they're going to be in? Could I say, oh, remember that time when we were away and we had that amazing night in that hotel? I was thinking about that. I wonder if we could recreate that in our own boring bedroom. I think we could. Like, there are ways to talk about it that don't make it be like, da 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 da. We
Right,
need
right.
to talk, because nobody wants to talk whenever you're like, we need to talk.
Sure.
So it's about being brave, because we must risk being vulnerable if we're going to increase the vulnerability in the relationship, which is what increasing sex really is, right? We're becoming more vulnerable physically. But let's say it's been a really long time and maybe there's performance issues. Maybe someone is having an erectile dysfunction moment, or the wife is going through menopause and it's painful. It's really not about genital sex or sex with penetration. There are so many other things that you could do, like, let's play a game and the loser has to give the winner a massage tonight. What if, what they do with couples a lot of times that go for sex therapy is you basically take sex off the table altogether. Like, we cannot have sex. So immediately that there's this relief of like, what is the expectation?
There's
What
no
is the
pressure.
performance things? Exactly.
Hmm.
Right. And then what if you turned your attention to something that you could do, even if it was something short? Maybe it's not a full body massage. Maybe it's like, let's just give each other quick hand massages before bed tonight. What if I rubbed your feet? What if you rubbed my feet? What if I gave you a neck rub quick? What we're talking about is reconnecting in a sensual way that reminds you there was a time in your life with this person. For those of you where you feel like it's been too long and like the ship has sailed, there was a time in your life when you felt pretty hot about this person. Like, you
Hmm.
had desire for them. And so if you want the relationship to continue to sort of grow in that way, you've got to be willing to, and if you're the one who makes the first move, then it means you've got to be a little bit willing to be vulnerable, right? Because the person may reject you. Hence why I say don't make it like a straight up sexual proposition in the beginning.
Right, right.
You don't have to say anything. You could just start touching your partner more. You
Hmm.
could just consciously sit closer to them on the couch or snuggle up with them, even if you haven't done that in a long time. And before you know it, this will become normalized. The
Hmm.
same way that being super, super separate has become normalized, you can normalize the closeness again. But for a lot of people, I find that the resentment stuff. So I'd love those who are listening, if this is resonating with you, I really would love you to do some kind of a resentment inventory and really think about, what are the negative things that you say about your partner a lot in your head? What are the things that drive you crazy about them? Are there things that you've done that you haven't told them really hurt your feelings or made you feel bad? Did they betray you, or are you coming on the other side of some kind of a big betrayal that really hasn't been handled? Those are all things that really can keep you stuck in that wanting to be away from them mode rather than wanting to be close to them. And no strategy that I'm going to give you right now, nothing that David and I talk about in this episode, can replace the work of figuring that out.
Hmm. And so if somebody has those resentments, how do they process through those? Because that can be, they could even be years in the making. How do they
Mhm.
unpack those?
Well, part of it is we always have to look at our side of the street, right? Every relationship that you're in, whether it's your marriage or another relationship or friendship, you are exactly 50% of that relationship. You are exactly responsible for 50% of whatever has gone down in that relationship. Even if the other person did something that you consider terrible, your 50% is staying, or in not talking about it, or in not insisting on going to therapy, or in just being mean to them for 2 years, like as payment.
Mm.
Like, we all have to take responsibility for our side of the street and look honestly. That it requires giving up the victim position, even if the person wronged you. Most infidelity, it's a symptom of something else going wrong in the marriage, unless someone is a sex addict or they're like a habitual offender, then okay. Most of the time, what I find, and a friend of mine, Esther Perel, writes quite a bit about this. She's got a book out called State of Union, and she has a book out called Mating in Captivity. Her work is just so brilliant. If you don't know her, people call her Esther, but it's actually pronounced Esther Perel. Anywho, and she has a great TEDx talk also, because think about the juxtaposition that we're put in when we get married, right? What are we seeking to build a life with someone's stability, right? Dependability, someone who's consistent. And what is erotic to humans? What feels erotic? The unknown, mystery, anything could happen. Well, how do we figure those things out, right? So it really does require effort to do so. So back to your question, people who are feeling resentment or feel like they've been wronged or feel like they don't want to be close to their partner because they did this terrible thing, I'd ask you to journal about your side of the street in that circumstance. And to be honest, because it's very easy to be in denial of all the symptoms along the way that the marriage or the relationship needed attention. And if you don't know how to give it the attention, meaning you didn't know how to have the hard conversation, maybe you lost yourself in Netflix or in drinking or in, something to numb your own feelings while your partner wasn't where they said they were going to be. And there's a part of you, usually when people come in and they say, my husband or my wife cheated on me, a lot of times if I say, did you have an inkling? They're like, yeah, I kind of did. You're like, okay, well, we're complicit in the situations that we find ourselves in. But I would do an inventory. Like, I'm resentful that, because many of those things are things that you just haven't asked for. You haven't made a simple request that the person do it differently. And you would be shocked at how much of the time it is small things that make us so resentful.
So you have these 8 steps that you talk about bringing the passion back. And that actually is number 1, which is a self-inventory for resentments.
Yep.
Can you walk us through a couple more? If they're,
Sure.
Obviously there are listeners at all different stages of life, but we have quite a few women who are kind of in the 30 to 50 category that they're in the middle of that marriage. Maybe they have kids or the kids are going off to college. What are some things that we can all do to help bring that passion back?
Well, the second thing on the list we've kind of already talked about, which is making a commitment to being physical, even if it's not initially sexual, right? It's like you can take the pressure off by not being like, we have to have mind-blowing sex tonight. Let's just start with small steps of just starting to reconnect in an affectionate way, because as that study shows, affection leads to more desire, which leads to more sex, and the other way around, which is great. Another thing is talking, because this is the thing. So I call it being more voluntarily vulnerable with your client, which is different than being indiscriminately vulnerable, right? It's mindfully wanting to make that connection. I see with my husband and myself that we've spent many years together, and I'm quite a talker, so talking about lots and lots and lots. And even if it's, what did you dream last night, or what did you eat today, or how are you feeling, or how's your back, from, if I remember something was hurting him, or my husband's like a political artist, so I'll say, oh, how's that job going? And even sometimes it's just, we're driving and I'll say, hey, what are you thinking? Now, this is not like the Spanish Inquisition. Like, I'm not worried about what he's thinking, right? I'm actually interested in what he's thinking, and I'm interested in him. And so part of it is staying interested and keeping a conversation, which can be difficult when you have a lot of things on your to-do list jointly. Children, listen, we're just all trying to pay the friggin' bills and do whatever we need to do to get through life. We hope we're enjoying it as well. But there are times when, especially if you have a lot of kids, or we raised 3, and that's a lot at one time. It's easy to just be like, we're tag teaming life, right? You got this, I got that. Bye. See you. Especially when you got little kids who are not sleeping. It's like, it's very easy to be completely disconnected, and it's a massive effort to try to have a real conversation. But I always suggest to clients that it's called State of the Union, which is that every other week, maybe, even if it's just 30 minutes over a cup of coffee. My husband and I do it on Sundays with the New York Times and coffee in bed, where we just talk about, like, how we doing? How is it going? We start with gratitude, because that makes it easier to talk about the things that, if something needs our attention that's not so positive,
Hmm.
we start with, thank you so much. You stayed up with the baby Tuesday and Wednesday, and I really appreciated it because I had that big meeting on Thursday. Like, gratitude becomes, which is also a way of being voluntarily vulnerable. Because when you become resentful, gratitude is usually the first thing to go away, because you're like, I'm not giving them anything because I'm still mad at them for these things.
Hmm.
But I can tell you the simple niceties of always being polite with your partner. And I don't mean formal, I mean grateful. It doesn't matter when my husband and I get up, whoever's the last person makes the bed, the other person later is like, thanks for making the bed. That may sound crazy and like redundant, like every single day somebody thanks someone for making the friggin' bed. And the answer is yes. Because what are we doing? We're adding things to this well of goodwill. And when the shit hits the fan, you're going to need that reserve in that well. So these are small ways, whether it's whoever unloads the dishwasher. Oh, I was going to do that, but thank you for doing it. Changing the laundry, all these things, because my husband and I live pretty like partners, right? We both own our own companies. We do our own thing, but I'm pretty clear that he definitely doesn't work for me. So anything he does for me is a gift. Anything I do for him, he sees it as a gift. And it feels good to be acknowledged. It makes us feel important. And that our efforts, it makes me want to do more. And this is how we continue to add to that well of goodwill. Because imagine if every time you did something, the person you're with was like, thank you so much for dinner. It was delicious. And something that's equitable. If my husband cooks, I clean, put the dishes away, which is usually how it is because he's a better cook than I am. But anyway, so we're basically looking at trying to take time to actually talk. If you're going to do a State of the Union, start it with the gratitudes. And then it's okay to move into, I would have appreciated more of a heads up on that thing on Wednesday. I felt like you put me on the spot, whatever it is. What we're doing in having a State of the Union is we're normalizing having conversations that are not all positive
Hmm.
and that are not all negative, because you have some couples who are just into blame, shame, guilt, blame, shame, guilt. And I mean, nothing kills a relationship faster than that dynamic. It's just a nightmare.
Hmm.
You want to say something about that, or you want me to move on?
No, yeah, I was thinking about even how this plays out in a family environment, because like our kids are 19 and 16, and we have dinner almost every night. We actually have dinner around our coffee table. The TV's off, but it just works for our family. And
Mm-hmm.
we do highs and lows every single night.
That's
And
great.
so every person gets a chance to, talk about their day. And it started to be one high and one low probably many, many years ago. And now it's kind of just a recap of whatever you want to talk about. And we'll kid each other. We're like, okay, how much are you going to talk? We're playful. But sometimes it ends up being some challenging conversations, because it's almost like a nightly family meeting. And most of them are just super positive and fun and playful and encouraging. And then sometimes it can come up with some challenging experiences because there was unmet expectations on
Mm-hmm.
somebody's part. Just this week we had a situation where um, a family member was using a piece of photographic equipment, because we're all pretty creative in our family, and it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't
Mm-hmm.
wasn't left in the same place. And then somebody else was upset about something. It just gives the opportunity, because it's there every single night. And that is creating that vulnerability, not just with my wife and I, but as a whole family, which is more connected to love, obviously not sexuality. But it helps my wife and I stay on the same page.
Yeah. But you're
Yeah.
also, look at what you're, I mean, it's such a beautiful thing to do, because look at what you're doing for your children, is that you're creating this muscle for them to tap into being mindful. They have to tap into, oh, I'm recapitulating my day, kind of, because someone's asking me. Let me think, how was that? Would I do
Hmm.
that differently? This creates a present moment consciousness in a way that if you just were shooting the shit about nothing, it probably wouldn't.
Hmm.
So it really is. I mean, that's a beautiful thing, and I think couples can do that too, very easily and in a very non-threatening way. So
Hmm.
rather than, if like carving out 30 minutes would be too much, how about just sharing the high and the low? Because again, this normalizes,
Right.
oh, I have the floor, you have the floor,
Right.
this person has the floor, you know?
Right. And it's institutionalizing it. We haven't even thought about it in that way, but it's going, no, 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 this is kind of, this is normal. This is what we do, which creates the connection, which is what you're talking about that we want, the vulnerability and connection. So, number 4, you say the fourth step is to shake it up. What do you mean by that?
That we all get into, we all do our relationship dance, and we all become habitual, because this is also part of the human condition. So to not be habitual around sex, where it's like, I do this, you do that, you do that, now we're done. Like, that is it, it's so easy to phone it in that way. But if you really want it to be more interesting and to have more desire, potentially suggest something different, potentially do something different that would be sort of out of the norm, even if it's just making out. Even if you're like, no sex, let's just make out tonight. And when's the last time you just made out with your partner? Like, we used to do that when we were teenagers. It was pretty hot. But most of the time we don't do that as adults. It doesn't mean you don't kiss, but there's something about doing something that would make it different, right? Not only, I mean, listen, if you have kids, then obviously having sex in the bedroom, great. At least there's one place you can have sex. But if you're empty nested, or if you're on vacation, do something that your 18-year-old self would think was really cool, and let your 50-year-old self have sex on the kitchen floor or in the backseat of a car or whatever. Just, and it doesn't have to be those things. I just mean do something different,
Hmm.
so that there's more energy in what you're doing. And the truth is, it's more exciting, because as I was talking about Esther Perel, so the thing that makes a marriage solid is the consistency, and that we can bring in this sense of mystery into our sexual or sensual life. You can role play. There's so many things that you can do that would make it more interesting. And maybe there were things that you wouldn't have done when you were younger, but now that you're older and know yourself better, maybe you'd be open to some of the things. Maybe your partner wanted to try something 20 years ago. Maybe now you're like, hey, maybe that could be hot. Let's see. So it requires vulnerability, but it's something that, it doesn't even have to be massive, just different.
Hmm. Good, good. What's number 5?
Number 5 is basically talking about what makes you feel sexy or sensual. It's like having some kind of a dialogue, right? It's like, it could be anything from when your partner cooks you dinner, right? See, I always talk, when I used to do couples therapy, when I was a couples therapist years ago, which PS I hated, but I did it because I wanted to prove I could to myself. Okay, I did it. It was so stressful. I would like be dripping sweat every time a couple left. I'm like, why are you doing this to yourself? You don't have to. Anyway, is hold on. Did I have a point? What was it? Oh, yes. Talking. The men would always be like the major complaints would be, men would want more sex, women would want more connection. And listen, that may sound, and I'm talking about heterosexual couples, were basically mainly who I dealt with. So I would always say to the men, and this is like heteronormative stuff, right? So I'm not saying this applies to everyone. I would say, if you think about helping her out without her asking you, doing the dishes, keeping your word, like doing the things you know that she wants you to do, I want you to think of that as foreplay, because that's how she experiences it. When you don't do those things and then you get into bed and you feel like you want to like put your hand on her thigh, she wants to punch you in the face. So if you're interested right? And then looking at what is it for the wife? What makes her want to be more sexual, and what are the things that don't? Listen, men are from wherever they're from, women are from Venus, Mars, right? I mean, that
Sure.
is
One of
true.
those.
Right. There's a fact that we are definitely wired differently. And so your partner may not know. And this is also where the love languages can come in, right? Where this book, very famous, The Five Love Languages, has been around for, I'm going to say, probably 3 decades. Like, it's been around forever. And it is
Sure.
still,
Gary Smalley.
yeah, right. Is that
Yeah.
who it is?
Yeah.
It's so relevant still, because if we think we project as humans, we project like how we want to be loved. That's how we love our partner. That's how we try to love our partner.
Which would be
Reality is,
sorry.
yeah,
Gift giving, words of
affirmation.
affirmation. Yeah.
Yep.
Acts of service.
Yep. Intimate touch.
And is that all 5 or is that 4?
No, we're missing one. So it's it's acts of service, intimate touch, words of affirmation. Oh, quality time,
Quality
and
time.
gifts.
Yes.
And gifts.
Yeah.
And now, when you can figure out what it is, if we were going to say broad stroke, can't be everyone, but broad stroke, men are really into acts of service. So if you told your partner that you would go pick up their dry cleaning and you don't, you forget, they're on a business trip and they come back, their feelings might be hurt in a way that you have no idea. So I know, for my husband, acts of service are important to him, even though he would not say that, but I know it, and it's true. So if I say I'm going to do something for him, or if he asks me, even if it's something like he sends me a link to watch a friggin' YouTube video about something, if I don't do it, I can see his feelings are hurt, like he feels unimportant. So I always go out of my way. Not that even if I don't even care what's on the video, it's not about that. It's about, he reached out to me in this way. You know, the Love Lab, right? John Gottman, the
Okay.
Love Lab. So 4 decades of, he's basically the foremost expert on being able to predict couples who will stay together or who will get divorced within a 94% accuracy after being with them for 15 minutes. Okay. So he does this whole thing about the love masters and the love disasters. And so basically, couples, we bid for the other person's attention, let's say X amount of times a day. So the disasters, there's different ways you can respond, right? So a YouTube link, right? That's a bidding for attention. You're sitting on a blanket in the park. You're reading a book. Your partner says, "Oh, hey, babe, there's a cardinal." Right? So you can either positively respond, which is like aggressively positive, where you put down your book, you go, "Oh my God, let me see." You get up, you go over. You can be positive and passive. You look up from your book, "Oh, that's cool," but you don't get up. You're still doing it. You can be passively negative, which is to be like, "Babe, who cares?" Right? Or you can be aggressively negative, like, "Stop interrupting me. I'm reading my effing book, la la." So he goes through this process that the disasters, 7 out of 10 times, when one or the other bid for the other's attention, it was either a negative response or ignored. The masters of love, 7 out of 10 times, they gave them some kind of a positive response. And so this tells us how much that type of communication is important, where, again, we're veering from what makes you sexy, but this all comes back to being able to feel sexy, basically, is being seen. So I don't have to care about the things that my husband cares about the same amount, but I do care that he cares about them. Right. So if he's super interested in, oh my God, the amount of classical music I go see, I want to shoot myself because I don't even like it, but I love him. And he wants to share it with me. It's not enough to be like, "Okay, go. I don't mind. Spend money on tickets. Do your thing." He wants to share it with me. So therefore, I do that because I want him to be happy. I mean, listen, if it was race car driving or boxing, I'd have to be like, "No, thanks." But, classical music, you can suck it up, go have a nice dinner, meet friends. It's fine. So anyway, back to what we were saying. And you can put the links if you want for the Gottman Institute about all of the studies, because his work is so fascinating.
Yeah, yeah.
So back to just finishing up number 5, which is to say,
Sure.
if there's something that makes you feel great, your partner does something, tell them, when you do that, you're my hero. Or when you do that, I feel so loved. It makes me feel really warm inside. When you do that thing, I was so grateful to wake up and see that you had taken care of whatever, because these are acts of service that make us feel loved. So it's about giving them positive verbal attention about the way they look or how desirable they are, but also sharing the things that they do that make us feel desirable. So
Hmm.
that was number 5.
Yeah. And so, I'm hearing you say it's not just feel sexual, but it's feel loved. It's feel appreciated, valued, seen, cared for, because ultimately that's the connection is there. And I think one of the things that I'm really picking up on this conversation is how I would even say the view of sex or the role of sex changes over the lifetime of a relationship. So I think back to my wife and I, we met when we were 20. We got married when we were 21. Um, a lot of energy, obviously, a lot of energy in terms of sexuality and so forth. And I'm not even sure I connected. I don't think I did about vulnerability. I didn't connect with it about care. It was more of a physical connection. And
Hmm.
now I'm 46. We've gone through lots of ups, some pretty low down, some pretty low lows. And uh, and also I actually am on I've been on antidepressants for the last 10 years, and that
Hmm.
really changed my um, sexual energy. And I find that she actually is more interested in sex now in terms of our relationship than I am.
Hmm.
And I have found that for me it's less about the physicality of it and more about the vulnerability of it. That as you're talking, because you're talking all about vulnerability, you're talking all about connection, you're talking all about love. It's like anybody who's listening to this conversation, they're not going to be in their 20s. There's no way, because they're
Hmm.
feeling right. You know what I mean? Like it's like, it's like there's just that physicality to it.
Yep.
It's that if you're talking about bringing the passion back, it's because there's a history there that has ups and downs, twists and turns, and there's history of emotional challenges, physical challenges, kid challenges, all of those things. But what I'm taking from what you're sharing is that there's so much inner work, I would say, that is connected to bringing back the passion. There's the physical aspects of it, but there's a
Hmm.
lot of inner work in ourselves and inner work in the marriage of how do I make sure that I'm communicating how I feel cared for and I'm listening to how she feels cared for. Am I right? Am I right here?
Yep. Yep. Yes, it is different. And what I'll add to what you're saying is that I have so many clients and myself have experienced this sort of resurrection in eroticism after putting in the effort, right? Knowing, right? For me, it was menopause that made me go, where did my libido go for 3.5 years? Like, oh my God, this is terrible. And I didn't tell my husband that I was feeling that way because I thought he would hurt his feelings and then he wouldn't want me to do it just to do it for him. Like, I just was like, listen, it's gonna pass, right? Went to my doctor, talked about it. And then about a year and a half into it, he's like, I feel like something's wrong. You seem like I'm hurting you. And I was like,
Mm,
well, okay. So I wasn't telling you, but it can be kind of painful at times. And, blah, blah. And he was like, Tara, why didn't you say something?
mm,
And I said, babe, I just thought it was going to pass. And I just didn't want it to get all like weird, like where it's like, I'm afraid to touch you. I don't want, like, I just thought it would pass. And he's like, but Tara, the whole time I sensed that there was something
mm,
wrong, but I didn't know what.
mhm.
So as much as I'm sorry that there's pain, now together we can work on so I made a choice because I thought I was sort of protecting him, maybe protecting my own ego. I'm not sure. But as we've been through that now for about a year and a half, this whole new resurrected sense of eroticism and connection and adventure, it's it's amazing. And I've seen this with many of my friends, that
Mm.
you go through those low lows. And then if you stay in it long enough, and if you're interested, right? Because it requires a certain amount of not being lazy, right? When we're talking about, we get into, you know how people say like, you get set in your ways when you get older, there's truth in that. And
Mhm.
so part of it is like, if we're ever in a hotel, I'm like, always hotel sex. Yes. Like, let's just take advantage of the situations that we're in, being on vacation, really being mindful of having more sex, different sex, wanting that connection. But again, so much of it has to do with, how are you the other 24 and a half hours of the day?
Right, right.
And that's where the communication, the vulnerability, the affection, the flirting, all of those things, affirming that your partner is still desirable to you, even if you're not having a ton of sex,
Mhm.
that they still look good. Now, one last thing I'll say before we get on to the others, and maybe we won't have time because they're going to have the download anyway, but about, there's this thing that a lot of people have written into me about and saying, I'm in really good shape. I've been with my husband for 25 years. I've been with my wife for 25 years. I'm the person who's healthy, and they've let themselves go.
Mm.
So they're not well. They've gained a ton of weight. They can barely get around. All they want to do is watch TV. They're drinking too much. So what do you do in those situations, right? And it's like, listen, you can only take care of your side of the street, and there is nothing wrong with saying your lack of health is negatively impacting us.
Mm.
Before I got married, because my husband's 10 years older than me, and there was another boyfriend I had who I really, really loved. And I was like, but he's never going to be in shape. And that's going to be a deal breaker in about 20 years. And I broke up
Mm.
with him.
Mm.
I knew it. I was like, this is a lifestyle. And I said to my husband, you are already 10 years older than me. So you can never, ever let yourself go or be out of shape. Like you can't like suddenly become a late in life alcoholic. Like, no, that's not going to work, because it's that lack of health really does profoundly impact a union, you
Mhm.
know?
It does. Yeah, it absolutely does. Well, as you mentioned, there are several more steps here that I definitely want people to be able to get a hold of. The URL, I didn't see a short URL on your website to get. Do you have a short one to get to
I
this
think I do.
sheet?
Hold on. Let me
If
see.
if
Or
you
we
did,
can, why don't we put it in the notes? Do you want to do that?
it's in the notes, but I also created a short URL for you. So
Oh,
if people
great.
just go to launchyourself.today/passion, so it's launchyourself.today/passion, it just forwards right to Terri Cole's website, and you can get the Get Your Passion Back cheat sheet.
Great.
And you definitely want to download that because it's got some great insights. And I just really appreciate you sharing about your own life experience and all that you've learned through not only your education, but your 20 plus years as a therapist and working with couples. I think this is super helpful for people. And I'm excited to see how it benefits people's lives. So thank you so much, Terri.
And thank you for what you're doing and for having me, because I really appreciate it.